Imagine losing everything you've built in a split second. Career, family, stability, even hope. What would you do if you were at rock bottom, unsure of how to take the next step? This is the story of Sophia, a woman who, after a devastating loss, made a decision that would change her life forever. But the path to recovery isn't easy, and the true strength she found came not from recovering what she had lost, but from something much more powerful. Prepare yourself for a journey of pain, transformation, and above all, redemption. What happened to Sophia may surprise you. When we look at the lives of successful people, we often imagine they have everything we've ever dreamed of: a solid career, a close-knit family, and a constant sense of security and happiness. For Sophia, this was the perfect scenario. She had everything the world could offer: a job admired by everyone, financial stability, and a promising future. Her life seemed like a fairy tale, but as everyone knows, not. All fairy tales have happy endings. Sophia's story didn't begin at rock bottom, but at the top. At 32, she was at the peak of her life. She was a respected executive with a happy home with her husband and children. Her career was on the rise, and recognition seemed to be a constant in her life. She was the kind of person many admired and aspired to be. Her friends saw her as a model of success, a woman who had achieved the impossible through hard work and perseverance. She always believed she was in control. Every step she took seemed aligned with her goals. There was no room for failure, and for a time, that belief held. But what Sophia didn't know was that life was about to become her greatest enemy. A combination of unexpected factors began to slowly unfold without her even realizing the danger looming. It all started with a seemingly small financial mistake. A poor investment decision, something that could be corrected quickly, or so she thought. Confidence in her own abilities led her to believe it would be a mere course correction. But things began to spiral out of control in surprising ways. One mistake led to another, and what seemed like a minor mistake soon turned into a financial nightmare. The consequences began to show. Partner companies pulled away, contracts were canceled, and the shadow of bankruptcy loomed large over Sophia's horizon. She never imagined that something so insignificant could trigger a chain of events that would change her life forever. At first, she tried to control the situation, as she always had. But the weight of the pressure became unbearable. Her finances crumbled, and with them, her confidence. Investors, who once saw Sophia as a confident and trustworthy leader, began to pull away. Work friends, who had once been allies, began to distance themselves, fearing that Sophia's downfall would affect them too. The pillar that had supported her career was crumbling before her eyes, and she didn't know how to stop it. And the worst part was when the bankruptcy wasn't just financial. Her self-confidence began to fade. Sophia felt vulnerable, lost, and her image of a strong, unbeatable woman began to crumble. The weight of shame and frustration overwhelmed her, and worst of all, she couldn't understand how she had gotten to this point. How could something that seemed so controlled and well-planned fall apart so quickly? The feeling of helplessness consumed her, and fear for the future took over every day. But the difficulties didn't stop there. External pressure began to affect her personal relationships. Her husband, who had previously supported her unconditionally, began showing signs of emotional distress. The tension at home became unbearable, and the family, which had once seemed perfect, was now on the brink of collapse. Her children, who had been the source of all her dedication, began to realize the weight she was carrying, but didn't know how to help. Sophia's emotional pain became an even greater burden than her financial difficulties. The reality of her downfall hit her hard, and Sophia found herself alone. Her friendships began to fade, and the few that remained were afraid to get involved in her crisis. The weight of loneliness began to feel even more crushing. She felt helpless, not knowing who to turn to, even in her darkest moments. But even on the darkest nights, something inside her began to stir. It was a flame, a feeling that, despite everything, she couldn't give in to. defeat. Even when the world seemed to be crumbling around her, Sophia knew she couldn't go on like this. Something inside her, however weak, still believed in the possibility of a new beginning. She felt she couldn't let her lifelong dream end without at least trying to get back up. And it was in this moment of crisis, where she found herself lost in direction, that the real battle began. No longer against others or external challenges, but against herself. Sophia knew she would have to make a difficult decision, continue to lament and sink deeper into her downfall, or find the strength within herself to start over, even if it seemed impossible. She was at rock bottom, but she still had the chance to change the course of her story. What would she do next? And could she weather this storm, emerging stronger than ever? The answers to these questions lay in her hands. The real battle was about to begin, and it wouldn't be an easy one. But Sophia was determined to discover what she was truly capable of achieving. Be sure to follow the rest of this emotional journey. If you were touched by Sophia's story, don't miss the chance to see how she rises from her ashes. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any chapter of this incredible story of overcoming. Like and share this video with anyone who needs a dose of inspiration and courage to start over. Together, let's witness the power of transformation and redemption. Sophia's life has always been marked by a sense of stability. Her career seemed secure, her relationship strong, and her life balanced. For years, she believed this balance was the key to success, and that if she kept things under control, she would never experience major setbacks. But fate, as always, has its own plans. It was at the height of her professional success that Sophia's first major loss occurred. She had worked hard to land the position of CEO at a large company. It was a dream come true, the pinnacle of her career. For years, she had dedicated herself to building her image as an unbeatable leader, someone her team trusted and admired. She had overcome immense obstacles and proven herself time and time again. The mornings were long and the nights short, but she didn't care. The vision of her name on the list of the country's most influential business leaders was the fuel that drove her. Sophia's world fell apart the moment she received a call that, at first glance, seemed trivial. She was in an important meeting, discussing a new project, when her phone vibrated on her desk. The number that appeared was unfamiliar, but the tone of the message seemed urgent. After a brief sigh, she apologized to her team and answered the phone, little imagining the devastating impact those words would have on her life. On the other end of the line was the company's CEO, a man she deeply respected and who had always supported her. But what he said wasn't what Sophia expected to hear. He was beginning to suspect some of her financial decisions and wanted to investigate further. He didn't accuse Sophia directly, but his words made it clear that something very serious was going on. In that moment, the ground seemed to drop out from under her feet. The company was experiencing financial difficulties. It wasn't just a matter of momentary profit or loss. The impact was profound, and investors were beginning to pull away. Concern for the company's future was palpable, and Sophia's decisions were somehow directly linked to the crisis. It was impossible to ignore the weight of each word. In the blink of an eye, the trust she had built over the years began to crumble. The following days were a whirlwind. The internal search began to escalate, and the pressure mounted by the minute. Doubts about her leadership abilities lingered, and distrust began to spread among her colleagues. Sophia began to realize that something much bigger was at stake: her reputation. Throughout her career, she had always seen herself as someone who could solve any problem, someone who never failed. But now, she was faced with a crisis she didn't know how to control. Sophia tried her best to deny the impact. She dedicated herself even more to her work, seeking solutions and trying to correct the mistakes she had made. But as time passed, the problems only worsened. Investors began withdrawing their holdings, and the company had to drastically cut costs, resulting in mass layoffs. Sophia had to look colleagues and friends in the eye and tell them they would lose their jobs, many of whom trusted her. The feeling of failure was overwhelming. As the days dragged on, Sophia found herself increasingly isolated. Her confidence was shattered, and she began to question her own abilities. How could she have failed so catastrophically? She constantly wondered where she had gone wrong. At night, when the house was silent, she wondered if she truly had control over her life, or if it was all just an illusion she had created. The first great loss wasn't just financial. It was emotional. The pain of seeing the company she loved so much go bankrupt, of seeing her colleagues' faces worried about the future, and of having to face the distrust in her own eyes, affected her deeply. But what hurt her most was the feeling that, somehow, she had let everyone down. Her identity was tied to success, and now that success had been taken from her, who was she really? Sophia found herself lost. The woman who had always been strong and unbeatable now felt fragile, unsure of what to do. She had the instinct to fight, to solve any problems that arose, but this time it seemed that everything she tried only made the situation worse. The shame was unbearable, and she began to withdraw from friends and family, preferring to suffer alone. The weight of guilt was a constant shadow in her mind, and she didn't know how to find a way out. Conversations with her husband, once full of plans and dreams, became tense and empty. The relationship began to suffer, as Sophia could no longer be the same woman he knew. Her husband, trying to be understanding, felt he could do nothing to help. He saw Sophia withdrawing into a world of frustration and sadness, and he didn't know how to support her in the way she needed. He also felt the weight of his own worries, and the marriage, which had once seemed solid, was now on the brink of a silent collapse. Sophia spent sleepless nights, reliving the moments that led to her loss. Doubt, fear, and anxiety consumed her. She felt powerless, as if defeated by something beyond her control. What began as a simple financial mistake turned into a personal catastrophe, and she didn't know how to recover. But it was in that moment of darkness, when despair seemed to dominate her mind, that Sophia realized something. The loss was painful, but it didn't mean the end. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but a small spark of hope began to shine. The journey of overcoming was about to begin, and though she didn't know how, Sophia decided she wouldn't give up. She still had a fight to fight, and this time, she was willing to fight with everything she had. If you've ever gone through difficult times, where life seemed to collapse around you, know that you're not alone. Sophia's journey is just beginning, and there's much more to come. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to follow every step of this moving story. Share this video with someone who needs a message of hope and resilience. Sophia's transformation is proof that, even in the greatest adversity, we can rise stronger than ever. The first loss was devastating, but what followed was even more painful. The initial shock of seeing everything Sophia had built crumble was just the beginning of a battle she never imagined she would wage with herself. When the company went bankrupt and the life she knew was gone, the real struggle began, a silent, dark struggle that only she could face. Success, once her identity, was now just a distant memory, and the feeling of being lost, of not knowing who she truly was without her triumphs and achievements, overwhelmed her. In the days following her loss, Sophia isolated herself. Her friends, always so present in her life, now seemed distant, as if they were in another world, far from the pain she felt. She tried to keep busy, work harder, do anything to distract her mind, but nothing seemed to work. Her thoughts spiraled into despair. How could I let this happen? She asked herself constantly. Where did I go wrong? The feeling of guilt suffocated her. The pressure was immense. She had dedicated herself completely, and now she was watching her life crumble like a house of cards. Years of effort wiped out in a matter of months. People who had once seen her as a leader, someone who had all the answers, now looked at her with suspicion. She felt she had lost the trust of everyone around her, not just investors and colleagues, but also her family. Her husband, though understanding, was beginning to show signs of concern. He watched Sophia lose herself more and more in doubt uncertainty, and the fear of no longer being who she thought she was. It was in this scenario of disillusionment that Sophia began to spiral into despair. She saw herself as a fraud. For years, she believed her career was a reflection of who she truly was. But now that all of that was falling apart, she no longer knew who she was without her profession, her title, or the image of success she had cultivated. The pain of failure consumed her, and the weight of her mistakes wasn't just financial. It extended deeply to her identity. She wondered what she would do next. What was left of her life? She couldn't see a way out. Every attempt at a solution seemed more distant. Her mind was mired in negative thoughts, and despair, however silent, was becoming a constant companion. Sophia found it difficult to get out of bed. She couldn't look in the mirror without questioning who that woman, reflected before her, really was. The person she saw no longer had confidence, no longer had a spark. She was simply exhausted, crushed by a reality that seemed endless. The days began to blend into an empty routine. She would wake up, but the weight of doubt and sadness prevented her from finding purpose in anything. She tried to go to work, but her eyes were fixed on an uncertain future. Each step felt futile, as if she were walking in circles with no way out. The walls of her home, which had once represented security, now imprisoned her. Every corner of the house seemed to echo the memories of her former life, and the silence that now filled these spaces was even more deafening. Sophia knew she needed help, but at the same time, she felt she had no right to ask for it. She had been the leader, the person everyone trusted, and now she found herself in a vulnerable position, unsure of how to get back on her feet. It was as if a black hole had formed inside her, sucking away all her energy and hope. And worst of all, the feeling that this hole was bottomless. The thought that she could lose even more. Her marriage, her dignity, her inner peace, terrified her. She had already lost so much, and the fear of losing more paralyzed her. What confused her even more was the fact that she couldn't understand what she was truly feeling. It was a mixture of anger and sadness, disillusionment, and fear. The anger was directed at herself. Why hadn't she seen her flaws? Why hadn't she anticipated the collapse? The questions kept arising. She felt as if she had been blinded by success and overconfidence. She had taken so much pride in her ability to always find a solution to any problem, but now she found herself without answers for her own life. Fear, on the other hand, paralyzed her even more profoundly. The fear of never being able to regain control, that the fall would be so great that there would be no recovery. It was the fear of the unknown, of the future, the fear of not being able to rebuild what had been destroyed. She no longer knew how to trust her own judgment. Her career failure had been a bitter lesson, and the weight of that lesson consumed her. But perhaps the most painful thing of all was the emptiness she felt in her heart, a lack of meaning. Before, her life had purpose. Her work was her passion. Now, nothing seemed to matter. Sophia, who had always believed that fulfillment lay in achieving her professional goals, found herself aimless, without the motivation to continue her journey. The feeling of being lost in her own world became oppressive. Every step seemed to lead toward a hopeless future. Sophia's internal struggle was intense and silent, but deep down, she was beginning to realize a fundamental truth. Despair was not the answer. She knew she was at a crossroads, but she didn't know which path to take. The pain of having failed, of having lost so much, seemed to be sapping her strength. But at the same time, she knew that if she didn't look forward, if she didn't try to find a reason to continue, she would succumb to emptiness. And it was at this point of deep despair, when all seemed lost, that the idea of starting over began to form, almost imperceptibly, like a seed planted in the darkness. But for Sophia, this would be a difficult step, one she didn't know if she could take. If you've ever felt lost, unsure of which path to take, be sure to follow Sophia's journey. Like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any chapter of this story of overcoming and starting over. If you know someone going through difficult times, share this video with them. Together, we can inspire each other to find our own strength to start over. The weight of hopelessness that had consumed Sophia for weeks seemed to be lifting, albeit slowly. The mourning for her fall wasn't over, but a faint thread of something new, something different, was beginning to emerge in the back of her mind. The pain of her loss was still there, poignant and unrelenting, but amidst it, something different was forming. A will to move forward, a resolve not to surrender to the inertia that dominated her. She was tired of seeing herself sink into sadness, of losing herself in the shadows of what had happened. She was finally ready to fight what frightened her most: the fear of permanent failure, and the feeling that she would never be the same again. The moment of change was silent. There was no grand revelation, no word of wisdom that made Sophia finally understand what she should do. It was an internal decision, almost imperceptible, but powerful. On one of her darkest days, when she no longer knew how to handle the pressure she felt, the doubt that had always haunted her dissipated for a moment. She realized that if she didn't do something, if she didn't take control of her life back, she would be trapped there forever. Fear and guilt might overwhelm her, but if she chose to face those feelings, she could regain what she had lost. Perhaps not in the same form, but with renewed strength. Sophia sat in her office, looking out her apartment window. The wind swayed the trees outside, and she felt the cool breeze, an invitation to breathe deeply, as if the world outside still offered opportunities. And it was there, in that stillness, that the idea began to take shape. She remembered what had driven her before, her passions, the work she had always loved. The difference now was that, instead of seeing herself as someone with everything lost, she began to imagine herself moving forward again, as a woman capable of rebuilding her life, piece by piece. This decision didn't come without resistance. There was a palpable fear that arose every time she considered trying again. The fear of failure, the fear of trying and failing again, the fear of being seen as someone who was no longer competent, no longer capable. Sophia knew the scars forming on her soul would take time to heal. She also knew it would be difficult to look at others and herself with the same confidence as before. But what she learned, through this long journey of pain, was that confidence doesn't come without its challenges. And perhaps the path she needed to take now was precisely one that required rebuilding her self-confidence, brick by brick. With that thought, something inside Sophia was rekindled. It wasn't a desire to return to her old lifestyle, to the status or recognition she had lost. It wasn't about that anymore. What she wanted now was a fresh start, a life where she wouldn't be defined by her failures, but by her ability to start over. She didn't need a title or a position to be happy. She needed a purpose, something that would make her feel alive again. The first decision she made was a simple but significant step. She stopped complaining. It wasn't that the pain had gone away, but she decided not to let it consume her. Sophia moved away from her self-destructive thoughts and looked for ways to take small steps toward healing. She began to care for herself differently. Before, she had always put work and others first, but now she knew she needed to put herself first, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. It started with small actions. She enrolled in an online leadership course, not because she wanted to immediately return to being a CEO, but because she felt she needed to learn something new, something that would challenge her and make her grow. Each day was a small victory. She also began to take better care of her mental health, practicing meditation and going to therapy. Sophia understood that recovery wasn't just about rebuilding what she had lost financially, but also about rebuilding her emotional and mental health. She needed to find peace within herself before anything external could be recovered. At first, these actions seemed small compared to the magnitude of what she had lost. But as she repeated them, her sense of control slowly returned. She began to realize that, while she couldn't change the past, She had power over her future. The fear didn't disappear, but Sophia learned to face it. And by facing it, she began to gain ground over it. Each decision she made, each step forward, gradually left the shadow of failure behind. The greatest challenge, however, wasn't external. It was internal. Sophia had to confront her own limits, her relentless self-criticism, and her deep fear of not being enough. She constantly questioned herself. Am I capable of going back to who I was? Can I really overcome this? But as she faced these questions, Sophia understood that being enough didn't mean being perfect or having everything under control. Being enough meant being human, acknowledging her flaws, and still having the courage to keep going. She was learning that true strength wasn't found in the absence of flaws, but in the ability to pick herself up when the ground seemed to crumble. Sophia also began to change her relationship with time. Before, she was constantly chasing success, unaware that true fulfillment came from the journey, not just the finish line. She began to appreciate the simpler moments. A quiet afternoon at home, a conversation with friends, the pleasure of learning something new. Gradually, she realized that true success wasn't measured solely by recognition or power, but by the ability to live authentically and with purpose. It was in this internal transformation that she found the strength to move forward. Each step she took brought her closer to who she truly wanted to be, and less to the image of who she thought she should be. Sophia understood that starting over didn't mean returning to square one, but creating something new from the ashes. She was creating a new version of herself, stronger, wiser, and more aware of her limitations and potential. The decision to start over wasn't easy, nor was it quick. She knew the road ahead would be long and arduous. But Sophia, for the first time in months, felt a sense of lightness, of possibility. The pain was still there, but it was no longer the only feeling that defined her. She was living again, and that was all she needed to take the next step. Have you ever faced the fear of starting over? Do you know what it's like to feel lost, but at the same time have the strength to move forward? If so, share in the comments and subscribe to the channel to follow Sophia's journey and that of so many others who have decided to start over. Like and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes. Together we can inspire each other to be stronger and more resilient on our own journey. The beginning of a new beginning, as Sophia soon learned, isn't something grand or immediate. There's no explosion of change that occurs in a single day, but rather a succession of small, often imperceptible, steps that begin to create a new reality. At first, the path seemed nebulous. There was no manual on how to rebuild one's life after such a devastating fall. What Sophia knew, however, was that if she didn't take action, if she didn't take control of her journey again, the spiral of self-sabotage and regret would never leave her alone. In the early days of the rebuilding process, Sophia felt constantly tired. It wasn't physical fatigue, but emotional. Rebuilding her life meant confronting the mistakes that had led her to this point, understanding where she'd gone wrong, and finding ways to learn from those failures. Instead of running away from the pain, as she had done for so long, she decided to face it head-on. But to do so, she knew she needed a new kind of help. The first step was to find a therapist to help her deal with the psychological and emotional pressure that had built up inside her. She knew the problem wasn't just financial or professional, but something much deeper, preventing her from seeing herself as someone worthy of a fresh start. Therapy was a turning point. For the first time, Sophia had the chance to expose her insecurities without fear of judgment. She began to realize that throughout her journey, she had never taken time for herself. She was always so focused on achieving the next goal, reaching the next milestone, that she had forgotten to take care of her mental health. During the sessions, she understood that true reconstruction was not just a matter of restoring what she had lost, but of redefining her vision of success and happiness. She didn't need to be Superwoman all the time. She didn't need to be perfect. Furthermore, Sophia began to realize that what was limiting her most was her need for control. She had always believed that life was something to be mastered, a set of pieces she could move however she pleased. Now she understood that life was not something she could always control. There were unpredictable factors, and part of rebuilding herself was accepting that uncertainty was part of the process. This was one of the greatest challenges she faced, learning to live with unpredictability and finding peace in doubt. At the same time, she began to reevaluate her career. Before everything fell apart, Sophia had dedicated herself to a job that seemed to be her only source of validation. But now she asked herself, what truly makes me happy? What do I really want for my professional life? She no longer wanted to follow the same path as before. The relentless pursuit of recognition and status felt empty. She needed something more aligned with who she truly was. So Sophia began studying new fields, learning skills she never imagined she had the time or interest for. She enrolled in courses on social entrepreneurship and community project management. She discovered a passion for social causes and felt renewed when she realized she could use her experience to positively impact the lives of others. Little by little, Sophia began rebuilding her career, but this time in a different way. She was no longer seeking status or external approval. She was searching for purpose. She began with small volunteer projects, helping local NGOs develop more effective strategies for community impact. These initial projects, though modest, brought her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. Sophia realized that her true value no longer lay in the position she held or the contract she signed, but in her ability to make a difference in the world around her. Furthermore, Sophia began to open up to others again. During her downfall, she had isolated herself, believing she had to carry the weight of her mistakes alone. But now, she understood that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but of strength. She began reconnecting with old friends, many of whom had been estranged during her times of great success. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, something she had never done before. She shared her experiences, her fears, and her doubts, and discovered she was not alone. People supported her in ways she hadn't expected, and this brought her immense comfort. The rebuilding process also involved healing her personal relationships, and this was something she began to understand more clearly. The rebuilding process, though challenging, was also profoundly liberating. Sophia gradually stopped seeing herself as a victim of life and began to see herself as a woman capable of transforming her reality, step by step. What she now realized was that each small step forward was a victory. There was no longer a rush to achieve major milestones. She understood that true transformation lay in the small daily steps, in moments of self-care, in conscious decisions not to be overcome by shame and fear, and in the small actions she took to rebuild her life, even if she was still far from her ultimate goal. Sophia also learned to deal with the ups and downs of her journey. Not every day was a good day. There were times when she felt exhausted, doubted her own decisions, and even considered giving up. But over time, she realized that rebuilding wasn't a linear process. There were days when she moved forward, and others when she seemed to be going backward. But the beauty of the process was that she was never again paralyzed by doubt or shame. Sophia learned to forgive herself, accept her mistakes, and most importantly, move forward. True reconstruction didn't happen overnight. But over time, she realized her life was taking a new direction, more aligned with her values and what truly made her happy. She was no longer the same woman she'd been before. She was stronger, more aware of her limitations, but also more confident that she could start over whenever necessary. If you're also going through a process of rebuilding your life, know that every small step counts. If you identified with Sophia's journey, share your story in the comments and subscribe to the channel to continue following her journey of overcoming and transformation. Share with anyone who needs inspiration, and don't forget to activate the bell to receive the next chapters of this incredible journey of new beginnings. Sophia's rebuilding process was underway, and although the hardest days were behind her, something crucial still needed to be done. She couldn't continue her journey of transformation without first confronting the ghosts of her past. That emotional weight, the unhealed wounds, the silent traumas that had accumulated over the years and which she had ignored for so long, all of it still haunted her. Even though life seemed to be moving forward, she knew that to truly break free, she would need to address everything that held her captive to the past. Sophia had always been a woman who preferred to focus on the future. Ever the optimist, she believed that what happened behind her should stay behind her. During her professional rise, she never had time to dwell on the pains of the past. The pressures of life, the emotional problems that arose over the years, were all postponed for some time in the future. But what she learned from her downfall was that when we don't deal with our wounds, they control us in ways we don't even realize. Trauma, fear, and unhealed insecurities shape our decisions and often prevent us from growing. It was during one of her therapy sessions where Sophia allowed herself to speak openly about her deepest feelings, that she realized that her life was not only marked by professional losses, but also by unresolved issues with her family. She had grown up in an environment where expectations were high, where perfectionism was the norm, and where love was often conditional. Her relationship with her parents had always been difficult. Her father, a demanding and distant man, never seemed satisfied with her achievements, and her mother, though loving, was always concerned with her external image and what others thought. Sophia never had the chance to feel like she was enough. From a young age, she was shaped by the need to please others, to be the perfect daughter, the exemplary student, the unbeatable professional. This led her to a relentless pursuit of approval, a cycle that never seemed to end. When she was promoted, when she reached her leadership position, she felt she had finally achieved the approval she had so desperately craved. But when she lost it, she realized she had never truly achieved herself. Her identity was based on what others thought of her, and when that was stripped away, only emptiness remained. What Sophia realized during her journey was that her quest for perfection and external validation was not only a reflection of her family environment, but also a deep-seated fear of rejection. She felt that if she wasn't perfect, she wouldn't be loved. She wouldn't be enough. This limiting belief followed her in everything she did, and was one of the main causes of her emotional and professional downfall. But Sophia gradually began to realize that these past wounds, these experiences of rejection and emotional abandonment, were deeply ingrained in her life, and more importantly, they needed to be confronted. She needed to face what was preventing her from feeling whole and worthy, independent of external approval. Only then would she be able to move forward in a genuine and healed way. The process of confronting these ghosts was not easy. Sophia began revisiting painful moments from her childhood and adolescence, something she had avoided for years. The conversations with her therapist were intense and often painful. She recalled the moments when she desperately tried to please her parents, the feeling of never being enough, the unspoken words that remained etched in her soul. She began to understand that the pain she felt was not just about professional failures, but about the internal struggle she was waging with herself, a struggle fueled by the emotional wounds of the past. But Sophia also learned a powerful lesson. Healing doesn't come from denial. Facing what happened, naming her wounds, was what allowed her to begin to free herself. She was no longer willing to let the memories of the past dominate her present. The more she allowed herself to feel the pain, the more she was able to release it. Through forgiveness, not just of others, but of herself, she began to find space to rebuild who she was, unshackled by what she had been. Throughout her journey, Sophia also realized that reconciling with her past didn't mean accepting abuse or the flaws of others, but accepting herself, with all her imperfections and vulnerabilities. She began to understand that there was no need to be perfect to be worthy of love, success, and happiness. She was finally learning to accept herself for who she was, with all her mistakes, fears, and insecurities. The process of confronting the ghosts of the past also involved difficult moments of dealing with her own self-criticism. For years, Sophia had condemned herself for every mistake, every failure, and had carried the weight of unbearable pressure. She learned that self-compassion was an essential skill for her recovery. To move forward, she needed to stop being her own enemy and become her own ally. Relentless self-criticism wasn't helping her. On the contrary, it was holding her back. Sophia also found healing in something she'd never experienced before: vulnerability. For years, she closed herself off from the world, trying to appear strong and unbreakable. But as she opened up to those she loved, and even to strangers with whom she shared her story, she began to understand that she didn't need to be perfect or invulnerable to be enough. She began to allow herself to make mistakes, to allow herself to be human. She began to value her emotions, her growth, and her personal achievements more than just the external ones. So the great challenge now was to keep moving forward, even with the ghosts of the past still present. Sophia knew that healing wouldn't happen all at once, that the traumas wouldn't be resolved immediately. But she also knew that by facing them, she was creating a new path for her life, one where the past would no longer define her. She had taken the first step, and that in itself was a great victory. If you've also dealt with trauma or emotional wounds from the past and know how difficult it is to face what hurts, share your story in the comments. Remember, healing begins with the first step. If you're enjoying Sophia's journey, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to receive the next chapters of this incredible story of overcoming. As Sophia progressed on her journey of rebuilding, something began to unfold within her that she hadn't realized before. The true strength that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Even though the pain of loss, disappointment, and insecurity was still a constant presence, she began to understand that what had kept her going thus far wasn't the veneer of invulnerability she'd always tried to project, but something much deeper, an inner strength she'd never recognized within herself. This moment of self-discovery was gradual. It wasn't a sudden flash in the pan, but rather a maturation process that unfolded as Sophia continued to work on herself, learning to deal with her limitations, traumas, and flaws. Throughout her journey of reconstruction, Sophia had to confront and abandon the idea that she needed to be perfect or infallible to be worthy of happiness. She had to understand that true strength came not from the absence of difficulties, but from the ability to face them with courage, resilience, and authenticity. It was during a quiet afternoon, alone, that Sophia had a revelation. After a long day of work on a volunteer project she had just started, she sat down to rest and reflect on everything that had happened. She looked back and saw not only the mistakes and failures, but also the moments of overcoming, the difficult decisions, the moments when she could have given up, but chose to keep going. It was then that she realized that, throughout her life, she had cultivated an innate ability to pick herself up, to keep fighting even when the world seemed to be falling apart around her. This recognition was the first step toward awakening her true strength. She began to understand that inner strength isn't something that manifests itself only in moments of great victory or achievement, but also in the small daily choices of not giving up, allowing herself to grow, learning from mistakes, and adapting to change. Sophia's true strength lay in her ability to persist, to keep moving forward, even when the future seemed uncertain. Sophia realized that her resilience didn't come from blind willpower, but from a deep understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. She learned to trust her instincts, to recognize her limitations without being paralyzed by them, and to embrace life's uncertainties as opportunities for growth, not insurmountable obstacles. She began to realize that true strength wasn't about being perfect or having everything under control, but about being able to keep going despite challenges, to stay true to her values and purpose, even when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. Sophia's journey of discovering her inner strength was a moment of profound self-discovery. She realized that, despite all her insecurities, she always had the power to create change within herself. Fear and doubt were still present, but she learned to use them as fuel for action. Instead of letting these feelings paralyze her, she began to use them as a driving force, a way to challenge herself further with each step. Little by little, Sophia began to see the impact of this new perspective. She felt a new strength when dealing with difficult situations. When problems arose, she no longer saw herself as a victim or powerless, but as someone capable of facing any challenge, finding solutions, and moving forward. Insecurity was replaced by self-confidence. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, because she had proven to herself that she was capable of rebuilding herself, starting over, and pushing herself beyond her own limits. Sophia's inner strength also manifested itself in her relationships with others. Previously, she sought external approval, but now she realized that true approval came from within. She learned to set healthy boundaries, to say no when necessary, and to surround herself with people who truly supported and respected her. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to trust others, and at the same time, to not depend on external validation to feel good about herself. This new understanding of her strengths and weaknesses didn't make her invulnerable, but rather more authentic and confident in her ability to handle whatever came her way. Sophia's true strength was also fueled by acceptance. She began to accept herself more, not just her successes, but also her failures. Understanding that she was human, that she made mistakes, and that this was part of her journey, helped her break free from the chains of perfectionism. Instead of beating herself up for not achieving all her goals, or for not being an idealized version of herself, Sophia began to celebrate her small victories. Every day she got up, every challenge she overcame, was an achievement. She began to realize that her true strength lay not in never failing, but in how she responded to failures and what she did afterward. This new perspective also profoundly impacted her personal life. Sophia began to relate more healthily to the people around her. Her marriage with her husband, already strained by the struggles they had faced together, began to strengthen again. They began to rediscover each other, supporting each other more genuinely, without the external pressures that had driven them apart. Sophia also reconnected with old friends, sharing her experiences of struggle and overcoming. She realized that by allowing herself to be more authentic, more genuine, the relationships around her became deeper and more meaningful. Sophia's awakening of inner strength wasn't an overnight process. It took time, patience, and above all, self-acceptance. But as she began to understand the magnitude of her own resilience, she began to see the world in a completely different way. Her fear and doubt didn't disappear, but she learned to face them with courage. She was more prepared than ever to face whatever lay ahead, because deep down, she knew that true strength came from within, and now she was at peace with that. Have you also discovered your inner strength when facing a challenge? How did you feel when you realized that, no matter how difficult, you had the power to change your life? Share in the comments and subscribe to the channel to continue following Sophia's journey. Like and activate the bell to receive the next chapters of stories of overcoming and transformation. After months of struggle, reflection, and growth, Sophia finally reached the end of her journey of reconstruction, or rather, the beginning of a new chapter. What seemed impossible not long ago now became a reality. She had not only regained her former life, but had transformed into a stronger, more resilient, and more authentic version of herself. Her journey was not just about regaining what she had lost, but about understanding the true value of what she had gained throughout the process, the inner strength that had been hidden within her all along. Looking back, Sophia no longer saw only the mistakes, the failures, and the traumas. She saw the lessons these difficult moments had taught her. Every fall, every difficulty, every emotional pain had been a fundamental part of her evolution. She was no longer attached to the idea of perfection. Instead, she embraced her imperfections, understanding that they were what made her unique, true, and above all, strong. Each of these moments, which had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, now became a stepping stone that had led her here, to her true purpose. Little by little, Sophia began building her new life, and for her, This process had nothing to do with recapturing the former success she once achieved. Success for Sophia became something entirely different. It wasn't limited to a position at work or recognition from others. For her, true success lay in being able to live according to her own values, feeling fulfilled and at peace with herself. She was no longer seeking a title or a company to run. Her life now had a new purpose. Sophia, upon restarting her career, realized that what truly mattered was no longer her position or power, but the positive impact she could have on people's lives. She began working on social now projects with a clear focus, promoting inclusion and education for underserved communities. Leveraging her leadership experience, she was able to help several organizations become more effective in their missions, sharing her vision of a more just and accessible world for all. The feeling of helping transform other people's lives gave Sophia a new meaning, a satisfaction she had never experienced in her previous career. Work was now more than a source of financial stability. It became a way to contribute to positive change in the world. This new purpose brought with it a renewal of her confidence. Although she still faced challenges and obstacles, Sophia knew she could overcome them. She no longer feared failure because she understood that failures were not the end, but rather part of the journey. Each new obstacle was an opportunity for growth, and she now knew how to deal with these challenges in a healthier and more balanced way. The shame and doubt that once paralyzed her no longer held power over her. She felt stronger every day, more prepared for life's adversities. On a personal level, the changes were also profound. Her relationship with her husband, which had been marked for a time by distance and tension, strengthened. Sophia not only regained her partner's trust, but also learned to communicate more openly and truthfully. They began to share more of their emotions, fears, and insecurities. Their marriage was now grounded in mutual respect, vulnerability, and support. Together, they began to build a more solid future, one in which they both felt heard and understood. She also reconnected with her friends on a deeper level. Throughout her journey, Sophia had isolated herself, believing she had to face everything alone. But by learning to open up and ask for help, she discovered the power of vulnerability. Her friends supported her in ways she never imagined. They weren't just there to celebrate her victories, but to walk alongside her through the difficult times. True friendship, she understood, doesn't require perfection, just honesty and presence. And with this, Sophia was able to build stronger, more authentic bonds. The greatest victory, however, was internal. Sophia finally felt complete. She no longer needed the approval of others to validate her worth. She felt worthy and secure in her own identity. The incessant self-criticism that had plagued her for so many years gave way to self-compassion and self-care. She learned to celebrate her small daily victories, to recognize her limits without judging herself, and to be grateful for the journey that had brought her to that point. Now, Sophia saw the world differently. Life was no longer a race to achieve perfection or prove something to someone. Life was about living authentically, embracing the ups and downs, and pursuing a purpose greater than mere personal success. She discovered that true victory lay in living with an open heart, being true to herself, and helping others along the way. The pain of the past hadn't completely disappeared, but she learned to use it as fuel to create something new and more meaningful. Sophia's personal victory wasn't about getting back to where she was before, but about becoming someone better, stronger, and more self-aware. She not only regained the trust, respect, and love she thought she'd lost, but also transformed into a more authentic and powerful version of herself. Sophia's journey, which began with failure and despair, now led her to a future full of possibilities, where she was the architect of her own life, with a new purpose, a new vision, and a strength she never imagined she possessed. If you're also going through a transformation, or if you've already experienced the incredible feeling of finding your true inner strength, share your story in the comments. And if you're inspired by Sophia's journey, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to continue following. Her stories of overcoming challenges and self-discovery, every step is a victory.